With the NBA season getting close to its halfway mark, I wanted to look back and look at my predictions for the NBA teams in these standings and compare them to what we see roughly right now at the halfway point, almost there, to kind of conclude if my predictions were right or if I was completely off on some of these teams. And I'll let you know, some of them I might have nailed, but some of them I completely swung and I missed. So we're going to be breaking down and looking at all of this and more on this episode of Swish City. Without further ado, let's dive in and let's get into it. So like I said in the introduction, we're going to be looking at the roster predictions and team predictions for these teams across the NBA in the standings, looking at my predictions from before the season and looking at where they stand now. And first, we're going to start off with that Eastern Conference. As we could see, the Cavaliers, Celtics, Knicks, Magic, and Bucks make up that top five, with the bottom five being the Wizards, Hornets, Raptors, Nets, and Sixers. Obviously, some of these teams have dealt with injuries. Some of these teams have performed expectations, and some teams have, relatively stayed where they are. But if we want to look at my predictions here, we can see that I had some that were completely off. If we want to look, these were my Eastern Conference predictions. And if you want to go back and watch the individual videos, you can go back and watch each deep dive that I did. But like I said, these are the predictions that I had. Celtics 1, Knicks 2, Sixers 3, Magic 4, Pacers 5, Bucks 6, Cavs 7, Heat 8, Hornets 9, Hawks 10, Raptors 11, Pistons 12, Bulls 13, Wizards 14, and Nets 15. And as you can tell, compared to the regular standings, some of them are hitting, but some of them are a little far off. If we want to look at those top five, like I mentioned, Cavs, Celtics, Knicks, Magics, and Bucks, I was roughly right around there. I had the Celtics at 1 and Knicks at 2. Those ones obviously pushing a little bit back. The Magic have been up there as they have been dealing with injuries, but I, thought they would have a really solid season. And the Pacers and Sixers are not up here, as we can see the Cavs and the Bucks of those teams. So the Bucks I had at 6. So the Bucks are right around there. Bucks dealt with some injuries early on. Pacers as well. Pacers still dealing with those injuries and have been climbing up the rankings now at 6th, as they were, towards the bottom half earlier on in the season. The one team that's kind of the outlier here when we're looking at this list is the Cavs and the Sixers. The Cavs were a lot higher in the actual standing, sitting at 1 compared to 7, and I was a little low on the Cavaliers. I won't lie, I didn't think that this double big lineup would work. I thought they would have to move Evan Mobley or Jared Allen. I didn't necessarily know how great of Kenny Atkinson would be as a head coach, but realistically, Cleveland has changed things around and has been very impressive as a regular season team for the last couple years, and with this perfect head coach, they have really unlocked their true potential. And I won't lie to you, I was wrong on them. And the Sixers, I was also wrong as well. Now, the Sixers have been able to kind of bounce back. They are, clawing their way to try to get into the play-in, but I just don't think they'll be a top 3 team, as they've dealt with multiple injuries to star players like Joel Embiid. Tyrese Maxey's been out for a little bit. We've obviously seen Paul George suffer some injuries, and ultimately, I think this team will scrape and will make the play-in/playoffs, as we will see some teams in the East kind of bottom out, which we'll get into in a little bit. But ultimately, I was wrong on some of those predictions. When looking at some of the rest of these teams, like I mentioned, Heat 7, Pistons 8, Hawks 9, Bulls, Sixers, Nets, Raptors, Hornets, Wizards. We want to look at the bottom. Raptors, Pistons, Bulls, Wizards, Nets. I was right on most of those bottom teams. I was wrong on the Pistons, and I did believe in the Pistons. I just went really high on them last year, and they really underperformed compared to that. So I didn't want to necessarily put all my eggs in this basket. But this year, the Pistons have been a solid team. It's currently sitting at 8th. They are in the plan above 500, and I expect them to make moves at the deadline for them to continue to be in this playoff push. And I desperately expect them to be in the play-in for sure, but possibly even in the playoffs as well, as a sneaky upset in the play. And the Hawks have also been impressive as well, with really key impacts from Dyson Daniels, Zachary Arshea, and steps up from Jalen Johnson, in which I didn't think they would be at that point level. Another team I was a little high on as well that didn't really perform this year was the Hornets. They've also dealt with multiple of injuries with LaMelo, with Brandon Miller, but also just not being able to be clicking right. Charles Lee has done a pretty solid job as his first year, but hasn't really instilled that culture. They also have lost Grant Williams to injury, had no real true center for the start of the season with Mark Williams dealing with stuff and Nick Richards dealing with stuff. So once again, the Hornets have been battered with injuries, but I would say the four teams that I was kind of wrong on those predictions were the Sixers and the Hornets, as I predicted them a little bit better than I thought they were going to be, as I think they're going to fall off a little bit worse. And then looking at some teams that did better than my expectations, I would say would be the Pistons, and obviously the Cleveland Cavaliers there. But I want to know your thoughts and kind of compare them to what your predictions were for the Eastern Conference as well. I still think that these teams in the top race will be impactful, and I truly think in the Eastern Conference we'll see the Cavs, Celtics, Knicks, Magic, Bucks, Pacers, Heat, and Pistons make the playoffs. I do think that the Sixers will make the play-in, and I think the Hawks will make the play-in. I think the Bulls will be that team to fall out with the Sixers as the Bulls look to move off guys like Nikola Vucevic and Zach LaVine ahead of the trade deadline. Now that we talked about the Eastern Conference, let's talk about that Western Conference as well, as there's two conferences in the NBA. And like I mentioned, in the West, we have seen a locked team comparative to the Eastern Conference, where a lot of these teams are very close, and there's just some teams towards the bottom. We see this, as we can see, Thunder, Rockets, Grizzlies, Nuggets, Clippers at the top five, Mavericks, Lakers, Timberwolves, Spurs, and Kings in the middle, and then the Suns, Warriors, Blazers, Jazz, and Pelicans rounding out that bottom five. And with my predictions, I went with the Thunder, Timberwolves, Mavs, Nuggets, Suns, Pelicans, Grizzlies, King, Rocket, Warriors, then Lakers, Clippers, Spurs, Jazz, Trail, Blazers. So as you can see with the Western Conference team compared to the Eastern Conference teams, I was a lot more wrong on these. And I feel like with the Western Conference, there's a lot more variance as well. We saw a lot of teams deal with injuries last season. There's a lot of younger teams. And the Western Conference is also just more competent and can just have the ebbs and flows of moving comparative to the East. The East is kind of a little bit locked, maybe 1-2 surprise teams. But in the West, it is truly a gauntlet, and we've seen that. Oklahoma City has truly secured themselves at the 1 seed like I predicted, and I truly thought that. But the Timberwolves, I thought were still going to be solid with Julius Randle and with Dante DiVincenzo, but they've been falling off a little bit. Haven't been able to get into that rhythm in the early season. Have been able to kind of get it back so far, but still doesn't look like the pieces are perfect for what they want to do over in Minnesota. The Mavs and Nuggets ahead at 3 and 4, and the Mavs have dealt with some injuries. That's why they've fallen. Obviously, Luka's been hurt. Kyrie recently just came back. Derek Lively's just getting looked at. They've dealt with multiple people as well getting the flu and dealing with the illness. I expect the Mavs to be a top tier team, but through the regular season, they just haven't been able to stay healthy to be able to compete with some of these top ones. The Nuggets as well, they are at the 4 seed. They've been able to crawl themselves back after a disappointing start, but they're still a team that's asking questions on, do they need more impactful pieces on this squad to compete with some of these younger teams, or do they just run with the squad that they truly have? One team that I was really wrong on in this top 5 was the Phoenix Suns, as I had them as a predicted top 5 team with Bradley Beal, with Kevin Durant, with Devin Booker, with Mike Budenholzer. I thought this team was going to change it around and at least be a little bit better than last year if they were able to stay healthy, but that's been the case. They've obviously benched Yusuf Nurkic. He's now a DNP. So the Suns need some center help, need to address that hole before they can start improving and really starting to get back into these conversations. And the Suns are a team will ultimately hold that question are if they are one way move away, like a Jimmy Butler, away from competing, or do they go in for the full reset? Looking as well at the top 5, another team I was wrong on was the Clippers, as they have been very, very solid, and I thought they were going to fall off. I thought with Kawhi Leonard being hurt going into this season, I thought with losing Paul George, this team wasn't going to be able to bounce back and recoup, but they clearly have with the key impacts they made in adding with losing Paul George's big salary, and that could be a thing for the Clippers and other teams to look at when looking to try to get rid of some top free agents. Don't do the sign and trade, just let them walk and recoup with some great talent around you. Now, when looking at some teams that I had that hit the wrong button, that are, towards the bottom here that have overperformed are the Lakers and the Spurs. Now, the Lakers are sitting in a playoff spot, have been a little rocky this year, and have been, a little bit questionable with their team, but I do think they'll still make moves to go out and enhance their roster like they did with Dorian Finney-Smith and adding him to really give them a playoff push for LeBron. And the Spurs have been a team that have been really, really nice and emerging with young players like Stephon Castle really showcasing his light with this Spurs team, and veterans like Chris Paul really teaching Victor Wembanyama how to handle the league, and added with Harrison Barnes. I think the Spurs are a team that could be in some qualifications as well. And then some other teams that like I mentioned, the Pelicans, Grizzlies, Kings, Rockets, and Warriors in the middle. Those have been all shooken up through the rankings. The Rockets are a top tier team, and I was a big believer on them, but not this high of a believer, as they've really showcased with their young core of Amen Thompson and Tari Eason taking those offensive leaps alongside Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, that they can be a young core of the future and are a resilient team with Ime Udoka. The Memphis Grizzlies have also been battered with injuries through last year and this season, but have still been able to power through it with those young guys really coming through, with even another one being added this season in a two-way standout in Jay Huff, who has made immediate impacts for this team. Three teams that are towards the bottom that have been really questionable, though, are the Kings, Warriors, and Pelicans. Obviously, the Pelicans have been battered with injuries since the start, as they lost DeJounte Murray, their new trade asset, their first game this season, and that was key. They also lost Zion Williamson for a little bit as well. They also lost key players in Brandon Ingram, Jordan Hawkins, CJ McCollum. They've been battered with injuries and are looking to sell. Potentially could be looking to flip stars in the future depending on what their draft pick is like. The Kings obviously had a rocky start. They fired Mike Brown and have been on a little bit of an uprise. Could they make some more moves to get themselves back into that competition in the West? And the Warriors, once again, have been probably the most even team, most mid team this season, currently sitting under 500 with Steph Curry getting older, with Draymond getting older, still want to make that impact and are on the prowl to make moves. So like I said, some of these teams towards the bottom, I do expect the Trailblazers and Jazz to kind of sit here. Obviously the Pelicans as well, as now they have a bottom record, but expect the other 12 teams in this Western Conference to be competing for those playoff spots. And if a team like the Spurs doesn't make it, they won't be mad. But if any of these other 11 teams falls out, serious questions are going to be had about their roster and what direction their team should truly move into if they don't get the pieces to make the play-in or possibly even compete for the chance to get into the playoffs. But I want to know your thoughts and your predictions. Like I mentioned, I went over mine. A lot of teams I was wrong on, more in the Western Conference, but a lot of teams I was kind of close with or around the same vicinity. And I truly think that some of these teams can still truly rise if they make these moves at the trade deadline and if they pursue some of these valuable free agents names that have been pondered around the trade market. But like I said, drop down your thoughts. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comment section, who you guys ultimately think are going to be the risers as well in the second half of the season, because this is just the first half, and the first half isn't always the final story. You always got to wait for the finish, and that could be a very different outcome from many of these teams, specifically in the Western Conference, due to how close it is. Like I said, you guys have been absolutely fantastic, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a great rest of your day, and peace out.